Hey there, Mama. You're listening to the Lift the Shame podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, mama of 5 and your family's intuitive eating dietitian, here to help you cut through the diet culture clutter so you can enjoy freedom with food as a family. I'm on a mission to help you end the generational legacy of diet culture in your home so you can experience motherhood free from food guilt and body shame. Listen in weekly for guidance on how you can ditch diet culture, heal your relationship with food and your body, and confidently raise intuitive eaters. Let's dive in and lift the shame together. Hey Mama, welcome back to the show. I'm so glad that you're here. For the last few weeks, we've been doing a little bit of a deep dive into your frequently asked questions about kids and sweets, and we're kind of going to wrap that up today. And if you haven't had a chance to listen, definitely go back to the last few episodes where you can hear more conversations just about some of your questions on the top of your mind when it comes to offering sweets to our kids. And we're going to kind of wrap that up today with really great, tangible, practical questions that I'm going to kind of rapid fire through. And hopefully this just gives you some things to think about, especially as you're considering how to navigate sweets in your home with your children. And the reason, or one of the reasons I really love these conversations talking about sweets in general is because they tend to be so demonized, especially by diet culture. And it can feel really confusing in terms of how to navigate this with our children. And we really want to think about supporting our kids and having a healthy relationship with food does include supporting them in learning how to self-regulate sweets. And oftentimes the messages that we're hearing are things like, you should cut out sweets, you should minimize sweets, don't let your kids have sugar, as if that is what our kids need in order to have a healthy relationship with food or just be healthy in general. I know this might seem super counterintuitive, and it's definitely countercultural, but kids need to have exposure to sweets. And oftentimes it's when sweets feel restricted or when access to sweets feels limited, that's when we tend to see a lot more problematic behaviors around sweets develop in our kids. And so that's why I wanted to just do a little bit of a deep dive. I know there's often a lot of questions around this. This is definitely a very nuanced conversation. And so I appreciate your questions. And just as a friendly reminder, you're always welcome to submit any questions to me that I can answer for you anonymously on the podcast. You can send those over to hello@crystalcargis.com. Or if you're on my email list and getting my weekly emails, you can always reply to those, as well as connecting with me over on Instagram @crystalcargis. I would love to hear from you and hear what's on your mind. So with that being said, let's dive into the questions for today. Again, I love these. I thought they were super practical and just may be on your mind as you're considering how to navigate sweets with your kids on a day-to-day basis. So first question here is, I've heard of people serving dessert with dinner and letting children eat in whatever order, amount, and what they want. Have you done this? And if so, how did it go? I love this question. And this is a great question. And, for so many of us, we grew up where desserts or sweets were just in their own separate category. And I know for me, there was a lot of stipulations and rules around sweets. And there was often a requirement of having to eat what was on our plate before we could have dessert, or desserts were really scarce, or we only had them on certain days, or again, special occasions. And the idea of offering sweets with meals, so offering, whatever it is, whatever dessert that you may have in your home, and just providing that for your child with other foods is a very interesting strategy. And, it may not work for everyone, and it may not be something that necessarily works for you and your family. I will just share from my perspective that it has been so amazing to incorporate this kind of strategy in our own home. This was something I stumbled across when our oldest was starting to become more interested in sweets, and I just realized and knew that I wanted to do things differently with her. I didn't want her to struggle with sweets in the way that I did. And I've shared bits about this before, but sweets were always something that was really tumultuous for me growing up, and definitely a big part of my own eating disorder. And I know a big part of that was that I never knew how to self-regulate them, and I never really had opportunities to self-regulate them. And they were very elevated in my own mind as a child growing up. And even beyond, like moving into my teens and early adult years, I just always felt like sweets were on a pedestal. And there was a lot of kind of guilt and shame associated with eating them. And so when I had my first child, that was something that I was really intentional about, at least in my mind. I didn't want her to struggle with sweets in the same way that I did, and wanted to do everything I could to support her abilities to eat them. Mind you, I think especially with our first, it feels like we're figuring things out as we go. I can't exactly remember how I heard of this or heard of people doing this, but I think just kind of intuitively, I felt like, this is something that I want my daughter to learn. And it had also been something that I kind of adopted on my own in my own eating disorder recovery and in my own healing journey with food, like learning how to normalize all foods and allowing myself to have sweets with meals and not have to wait until after and kind of eat things in the order that I felt like doing. And so I wanted to try to replicate that with my own daughter. And one kind of tangible way of doing that, at least in my own mind at the time, was by being intentional in offering whatever sweet component that we might have been having with that meal alongside the other foods that we were also eating together as a family. For me and for our family, it definitely felt more intuitive. But I think part of it was based on my own kind of recovery journey and my own healing with food and some of the things that I was practicing and integrating for myself. And so, I just wanted to kind of replicate that for her. And it's definitely a strategy that's reinforced through Ellen Satter's work, if you're familiar with Ellen Satter and the division of responsibility. And don't worry, we're going to be talking a lot more about that in upcoming episodes. If you're not familiar with Ellen Satter or division of responsibility, we have a lot to unpack there. But generally, that is something that she recommends in her work as well, is that in order to help support a child with self-regulation, we just want to offer sweets alongside other foods that our kids are eating and trust them to eat what they need from the foods that have been provided. And I love that strategy. And ultimately, in the work that I do, and also what I've seen with my own children, is that it is very powerful in allowing our kids to not just create an equal playing field for all food, but it really helps kind of negate any external rules that may start formulating in their mind about what they should eat or how they should eat or what order they should eat. Because remember, like any rigidity or any rules that we form or any dichotomy around food, like this is good or this is bad, that can oftentimes be a trigger for disordered eating. And so when we can just create a neutral environment for our kids to learn how to eat, and we're not creating any stipulations around sweets, or we're not saying we have to eat this and then have dessert. When we just kind of offer it to them and trust them and allow them to eat what they need, it really truly does support their intuitive eating abilities. This is not just for dinner. Like really, we circle this strategy across the board with different eating times and just really integrating sweets as part of the rest of the foods that we're eating. Again, when we do that, it helps our child to just keep an equal playing field for all food. And when all food is kind of equal in their mind, then they're really making their food decisions based on what feels best in their bodies, not based on external rules, which is what we want to help implement in order to preserve their intuitive eating abilities. This is an amazing strategy, and really it can help negate some of that scarcity mentality around desserts and sweets as well. And again, when sweets feel scarce in a child's mind, they're more likely to overeat or potentially kind of binge eat on sweets when access is made available. And that's something that I've also seen just with families that I've worked with, when sweets are reserved for special occasions, or we're going to eat this, and then after you eat your dinner, we'll have dessert, that sometimes kids have a tendency to overeat because, again, there's like a separation of food, and it can be harder for them to kind of tune in to what their bodies are needing. No shame if you don't do this with your family, or you've thought about doing it, but maybe it feels scary. I totally get it. It can feel like a very counterintuitive approach to feeding. And again, a big piece of that is because so much of feeding kids is steeped in diet culture, where we're told like your kid should be eating vegetables and they should be eating protein before they're eating any type of sweets. Or if you offer sweets with the meal, then they'll only want to eat the sweets and that's it. And they won't be interested in eating other foods. And that can certainly be true if your child has maybe had some limited or restricted access to sweets. However, what I've seen from my own experience, and with my own children in particular is, this consistent approach of offering sweets with meals really does kind of normalize that food for them, and it allows them to explore all foods equally. And I have some amazing snapshots of my own kids. I love watching my kids eat, and it always feels so healing for me. And it's just sometimes so validating and such an important reminder that I can trust them, because oftentimes when we feel uncomfortable with how our kids are eating, it likely has something to do with us and some of our own fears and wounds that we may have experienced around food. But when I can lean into trust and lean into these strategies that maybe do feel counterintuitive, but are supportive of helping my kids learn how to self-regulate all foods, it's such a beautiful thing to experience. But I have some funny pictures of my kids like holding a piece of roasted vegetable in one hand and then a lollipop in the other hand, or a popsicle in the other hand, and just going in between different foods like that. And our kids have the freedom and the flexibility to be able to do that when sweets don't feel scarce and when sweets are offered as part of the rest of the meal. It really helps prevent that segregation in their mind where sweets are elevated or put up on a pedestal because they're reserved for a certain eating time. And the other thing too is that sometimes I think when sweets are reserved for after meals, and sometimes it can create an unconscious message for our kids where they feel like, oh, I have to get through all of this before I can eat the thing that I really want. Versus if we just kind of make it all available to them, they're able to eat what they want in the order that they want. And it's all going in the same place anyway. So order doesn't really matter. What we want is our kids to be able to decide for themselves what that looks like for them. The only person living in your child's body is your child. And we want to honor their body autonomy by allowing them to eat the foods that they'd like from what we've made available to them. And just a forewarning, if you're trying this out for the first time and you're starting to implement this and you're including sweets with the rest of your family's meal, it is very likely that your child will go for the sweets first and will kind of stick to that routine for some time. It takes some consistency in order for kids to actually really trust and believe that if I have consistent access to these foods, I don't have to eat it all just for the sake of it being available, because I know it's going to be available again today, tomorrow. Like, they have multiple opportunities, so it eliminates that kind of FOMO around sweets and really does allow them to feel naturally curious about venturing out and trying different foods on their own timeline. So this is a really interesting topic. I feel like I could chat a lot more about this, but just wanted to share a little bit of my insight. And it's really important to implement what works best for your family. And sometimes we don't always have sweets with dinner per se. Like, sometimes we do it with lunch. I'm a huge proponent of doing it at breakfast too, at snacks. I think the goal is to be flexible and model that flexibility for our kids. And, sometimes there are some sweets that are difficult to serve with meals, like ice cream per se. And there's different ways to try and implement that. And it's not to say that you can't have a dessert time ever, because it's going to segregate that in your child's mind. I think if you are having sweets at a separate time outside of meals and treating it like a dessert time, that how you approach it is key. And, not having any stipulations in place in order for your child to have whatever sweet that you're offering is a great way to approach that, where it's like, this food is available regardless of what you ate earlier or didn't eat earlier. When we can remove stipulations, it really helps our kids. Another kind of idea here is removing any categorizing terminology in how we talk about foods with our kids. So I actually try to avoid using the word sweet or desserts, because again, it can kind of segregate those foods into their own category, which can elevate them in a child's mind. So I like to just call it by what it is. Today for dinner, we're having chicken stir fry and rice and cookies. Just calling things what they are really, again, helps create that equal playing field for our kids so they can learn how to eat what feels best for them. So I hope that helps, Mama. And I'm always happy to answer more questions related to that, or if I can help clarify anything further. Next question here. This is a really good one. I've heard of parents responding to a child's request with, "That's not on the menu tonight, but we'll have some tomorrow." But I think I fear using this because it still feels controlling to me. Like I'm using it because I have ideas about what my child should eat. For example, if they went to a birthday party and have had a lot of sugar and then are asking for sweets after dinner, and I think they've had plenty already, so I say this. Is this using gentle nutrition or is it restricting? This is a great question. I love this, and there's a lot to unpack here. And I just want to say thank you, Mama, for sharing your thoughts around this, because I think this is much more common than you might think in terms of parents having similar questions around this. It sounds like what I'm hearing here is that you're unsure how to respond to your child's requests when they're asking for sweets multiple times a day. And if you feel like, all right, they've kind of already had enough here, how do I respond? And if I'm saying no, is that being restrictive? And oftentimes I've heard this phrase a lot as well, saying, "That's not on the menu right now." And I think that the fact that you are asking questions about this and getting curious about this is so insightful. And oftentimes, if we as parents have a hidden agenda, right? Like if we aren't comfortable with what our kids are eating or how much they're eating, and we try to micromanage it in a subtle way, that can come across as a hidden agenda. And sometimes our own hidden agendas can interfere with our kids being able to have the experiences that they need to learn how to self-regulate sweets and to learn how to navigate experiences where they may have multiple exposures to sweets in one day, like the experience that you've described, where maybe they're going to a birthday party and they've had cake, they've had ice cream, they've had candy, and then they're coming home and wanting more. And so sometimes as parents, we can feel stuck. Like, how do I respond, or how do I hold a boundary here without causing my child to feel restricted? And I actually have a whole podcast episode about that, and I'll link it to the show notes. If you're wondering, like, how do I respond to my kids' requests without causing them to feel deprived or restricted, definitely make sure you go back and listen to that episode. But one key question to ask yourself here is, what is your motivation for saying no or deferring your child's food requests, especially around sweets? Right? Like oftentimes we want to say no because we're uncomfortable with how much our kids are eating. But if you step back and you're looking at the situation, maybe they need those exposures. Maybe they need to see sweets repeatedly or more frequently in order to feel more relaxed about them. And oftentimes that's the case. Certainly what I see from my experience and families that I work with is that we generally tend to underestimate how much exposure our kids need, or the quantity of sweets that they need to actually feel relaxed and okay around sweets, and to feel comfortable self-regulating them or feeling comfortable not having immediate access to them. So these are all things that are important to consider. And one thing to ask yourself, like, are you using the phrase, "this isn't on the menu tonight," in order to minimize your child's access to a preferred food? And I know that's a tough question to ask yourself, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to reflect on yourself, like, what is my motivation here? And again, when you can ask yourself that question, that is kind of a litmus test to help you decipher, is there a hidden agenda that's surfacing here that's trying to micromanage what your child's eating or what your child has exposure to in a hidden or kind of roundabout way? Generally, when we're thinking about integrating access to sweets, one thing that, in terms of a criteria to think about is it feasible for me to offer this? Like, do I actually have these things on hand? Sometimes like we'll have a container of cookies and I want those cookies to last through the week for lunches or whatever. And so I might tell my kiddo, like, we're only going to have one tonight because I want to save those for lunches for the rest of the week. That's a little bit of a different criteria for saying no to their request in that moment. And we just want to consider, like, what is the motivation behind us trying to defer our child's request? Sometimes that's why I have some qualms with the phrase, "that's not on the menu tonight," because sometimes it can really be a hidden agenda that's at play. And that's why, again, I always think it can be helpful to just assess, like, what is your motivation behind saying that to your child? Is it because you're uncomfortable with how much they're eating? Or is it because you feel like they shouldn't be having more sweets based on what they've had earlier in the day? Oftentimes, if we can examine what's coming up for us, that in itself can give us an answer. Maybe we need to lean into that discomfort and do the opposite of what our tendency or our default is in order to support our kids with the experiences that they need to learn how to self-regulate sweets. And it's not abnormal for kids to be able to have or want sweets multiple times a day. I think this kind of goes back to some of the ingrained food rules that a lot of us may have in our head when it comes to food for our kids. Like, this is another common thing that I hear, is that kids should only get sweets one time a day. I personally feel like that's not enough, given the amount of sweets that are available, given the role that sweets can play in a healthy relationship with food. Often kids need to see sweets multiple times a day. And that's not abnormal. And you know, just even thinking about us as adults, like, I know a lot of adults that I talk to and a lot of moms that I work with, you know, will share, like, I enjoy having something sweet multiple times a day, or after my meals, or with my meals. And I think when we can examine like what feels good for us, it kind of normalizes that our kids would want something similar too. Like, it's normal for our kids to gravitate towards those types of foods. And sweets and desserts can actually play a really important role in their overall health and nutrition. But because, again, those foods are so highly demonized, we tend to segregate them and create, you know, unconscious food rules for them, where it's like, no, you can only have these one time a day and that should be sufficient. But what we want to do is look at our kids and look at their behavior. Are they asking for sweets frequently? Do they seem concerned about the next time that they get to have sweets? Those can actually be indicators that they need to see them more frequently. And so we kind of want to lean into that and observe their behavior from a place of curiosity to help us understand how we can best respond to them. And sometimes that means sacrificing our original plan, or being flexible with how we're planning our menu, or how we're planning the way that we're approaching food in our home for the rest of the day, in order to be responsive to what our kids need to feel more relaxed and flexible with food. Now, again, this doesn't mean that you just say yes to your kids' sweet requests all day long, and that certainly isn't feasible. However, it's important to lean into what is driving your decisions when it comes to what you offer your children, or when you say yes or when you say no. I think this is also something really important to continue to examine, like, what is driving how we approach this with our kids. Why are we saying no in this situation? Again, I want to defer you back to this episode on how you can respond to your kids to maybe defer some of their requests, and making sure that it kind of minimizes any feelings of deprivation or restriction. There are definitely ways to do that. Asking the question, am I trying to kind of punt the football here by saying it's not on the menu to avoid something that feels uncomfortable, right? For you, but maybe your child needs that experience. So I hope that helps. I know that's not a clear-cut answer, but it just gives you some things to think about. How are you basing what you're providing your kids? And how I kind of see it is, when we can offer a variety of different foods and incorporate sweets multiple times a day, it comes back to this trust component that ultimately we can trust our kids to eat what they need from all the foods that we've provided them. And sometimes that means our kids are going to eat sweets all day long. And that's okay. And that's part of them self-regulating and learning how to eat, and learning how to kind of flex and build their intuitive eating abilities. Kids will kind of learn what feels good in their bodies and what doesn't. Just as a little example and a story here, it was my son's birthday recently, and we always do cinnamon rolls as a tradition for breakfast in the morning. And so we did that for him. And then it was a school day, so he took cupcakes to school, and it was the last day of school before spring break. And so they had a little party, they had cupcakes, they had candy. And then when he came home from school, we had a little bit of a party for him, and we had a piñata with candy and cake again. And I just remember my son saying, after we had cracked the piñata, he filled up a bag of candy, but wasn't eating it like a lot of the other kids were. And he just brought his bag over to me and was like, "Mom, I think I've had enough candy today. And he's like, can I save this for later? And I was like, sure, bud, no problem. Just listen to your tummy, listen to what your body wants. And just think about like, wow, that was so amazing that he could tune into that and kind of tap into that on his own. I didn't have to sit there and tell him, all right, bud, you've already had enough sugar earlier today, so I think you better save this candy for later. He was able to come into that experience on his own without me regulating that for him. I still made food regularly available. I offered multiple different things, and he was able to make that decision based on what felt best for him. And so often, I think we try to do that job for our kids by telling them things or by curbing their opportunities to have sweets, even if it's been multiple times in a day, because we're worried it's going to tap out their sugar intake, basically. But sometimes I'm wondering, like, does that rob our kids of the experiences that they need to learn, like, what feels good in my body and what doesn't? And sometimes I think this can come from a place of us not fully trusting our kids with food. And sometimes that comes back to us. Like sometimes it's hard to extend trust to our kids around food because we have difficulty fully trusting ourselves. Or sometimes our experiences around food are informing how we feel about our kids and how they eat. So just some food for thought. Again, I know it's not like a clear-cut answer here, but I hope this gives you some things to think about. And my encouragement is always to kind of lean into curiosity about what's coming up for you. And I like to err on the side of offering permission as long as it's feasible and as long as it's something that you have in your family, like you have on stock. Sometimes our kids are asking us for things that we just don't have or we don't have enough of to go around. And again, I don't think the solution is just to say yes all day long or say, oh, I don't care. It's just free reign of the fridge and pantry all day long. Our kids definitely still need some structure and support, but I think that structure should be flexible and should be adaptable in a way that allows us to be responsive to the needs that our kids have to develop their intuitive eating abilities. So that's kind of my 2 cents there. I hope that's helpful. And then last question, kind of piggybacking on this last point here is, do you have any recommendations on how to handle parties? Do you help your child plate their food to promote variety, or do they make plates themselves? This is a great question too. And I'm going to definitely have some upcoming episodes on meal times at home and in social events. So there'll definitely be more about this for sure. But in general, I think this can depend on your child's age. I think it can depend on their abilities and their comfortability on serving themselves. Overall, I'm a huge proponent of allowing our kids to self-serve from the food that is available because I think it really does honor their autonomy. And autonomy is such a big piece in our kids being able to learn how to eat, really. So often when we serve our kids or we make their plates, it often comes with a hidden agenda. I know I've talked about this before, but when we're putting things on their plate, sometimes it's coming with this unspoken expectation that we want them to eat whatever it is that we're putting on their plate, or put a variety of foods in hopes that they will eat a variety. And oftentimes it creates expectations in our minds around how our kids should eat. And our expectations around how our kids should eat often don't line up with how our kids actually eat. And it's not unusual for kids to just prefer 1 or 2 foods at meal times and not necessarily eating a variety of foods that you or I might do as an adult. I am a huge proponent of allowing our kids to self-serve, but again, in ways that works best for those kids. Like I have some kids at home here that like me to put stuff on their plate, but I usually always ask their permission, or I ask like, hey, would you like some of this? Would you like me to put it on your plate? Where would you like me to put it on your plate? And I think when we can involve them in that decision-making process, it allows them to feel like, hey, I'm in charge of my own body, and that feels really good to them. And it really does reinforce this message that you are in charge of your own body, and I trust you to listen to your body and what your body needs, versus us sometimes using plating our kids' food as a subtle way of micromanaging what they're eating. And I get it because birthday parties can feel different. Birthday parties often sometimes feel a little bit chaotic, or sometimes like birthday parties, like there's only so many like cupcakes or things to go around for all the kids. So we want to be cognizant of that. But generally, I like to allow my kids to self-serve. And again, giving them permission and autonomy to choose the things that they would want to eat, because it gives them that freedom and flexibility to have those experiences with food. And just remember, your child may choose things that you're not comfortable with, or their plate might look like cookies and a cupcake and candy and nothing else. But again, like, think about the long term. What are the pros of your child being able to have these experiences? Learning, what does it feel like to eat all these foods? How does that feel in their body? The other thing too to keep in mind is that for a lot of kids, birthday parties or parties in general are very novel experiences, meaning sometimes they're going to just be excited about all the different foods and the different things that they see that they maybe normally don't have access to. So you might want to consider that too. Like, they likely do need exposure to the things that they're seeing just because they're excited about them and they want to be able to try different things. And part of us allowing them to do that is giving them permission to self-serve versus us being the gatekeepers of what they can have and what they can't have. Another thing here to just remember too is that our kids are really picking up on our energy and are very attuned to how we feel about them eating. So it's one thing to give your child access, but it's another thing to project this messaging, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, that you trust them to eat what they're serving themselves, even if it's making you feel uncomfortable. And that certainly has happened to me at various parties where, there's all kinds of different foods. And I've seen my kids like pile things on their plate that I'm like, whoa, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But, just being able to lean into trust and lean into letting our kids have these experiences. I can't emphasize that enough. They really need experiences. They don't need lectures. They need us to trust them and allow them those opportunities to figure out like what feels good in their body and what doesn't. And I know that parties can be kind of tricky to navigate. And of course, like, you want to be cognizant of the fact that there may only be so much of certain things to go around. Ultimately, birthday parties can be a great experience for them to learn how to self-regulate and to have those real life experiences that support them in further developing their intuitive eating abilities. Because parties, going out to eat, like, these are all real life experiences, and you want your kids to know how to navigate those so that it's not a problematic area for them as they grow up and get older. The other thing to consider is, are there things at birthday parties that your child is super pumped about that they may not be getting access to in your own home? So birthday parties can also be a great opportunity to kind of assess, like, all right, is my kid super obsessive about the cupcakes or the candy or the ice cream or the pizza? These are great opportunities for you to see what your child is showing a super high interest in. And if you're going to birthday parties and your child is so obsessive with the food that's there that they can't engage in the play and like the activities that are happening, that can be an indicator that there's other things going on and that they may need more exposure to those foods in order to feel more relaxed about them. So that's the nice thing that I like about birthday parties too, is that it allows us to kind of see and assess like where my child is. They may be getting access to foods that you may not regularly have in your own home. So that can help you. If you're seeing that your child is really interested in candy and is asking frequently for candy and seems very obsessive about it when you're at a birthday party, that can be a great opportunity for you to kind of lean into that and say, okay, I want to offer my child candy more frequently so that birthday parties are not the only time that they're seeing candy or special occasions or candy-centered holidays. Like, we want to normalize those things by making them accessible within feasible ways within your own home. So just something to consider too. But I hope this helps. I know we kind of went through a few different scenarios and a few different things here. But as always, I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have follow-up questions that you'd like me to answer on anything that I discussed here, please feel free to get in contact with me. And just know that I'm so appreciative of you tuning in. I always love hearing from you. And I'm just so grateful that you're part of this community. I hope you'll come back next week. We're going to be delving into some different topics and a new series as we continue to have conversations around ways that you can raise intuitive intuitive eaters who are free from food guilt and body shame. So that is it for now, and I can't wait to see you next week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lift the Shame podcast. For more tips and guidance on your motherhood journey, come connect with me on Instagram at Crystal Karges. Until next week, Mama, I'll be cheering you on. Bye for now.